Thank you. For the Greens, Mrs. Andersdotter, for 4.5 minutes.
Dear Chairwoman, thank you. Dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, the Green Group and the Pirates welcome the participation of Russia in multilateral fora of trade, and we see it as an important step that Russia has joined the World Trade Organization. However, we believe that proper time must be given to Russia to implement the WTO requirements before we start talking about further bilateral negotiations on a free trade agreement with the EU. We agree that there is reason to remain vigilant on the Eurasian Customs Union, but we cannot automatically assume it is incompatible with Russia's WTO obligations. Our group filed a number of amendments for which I would like to ask your support. In particular, we would like you to rethink the wisdom of paragraph 11, last indent, regarding pre-establishment investment protection, and to support our Amendment 8. Russia has for a long time been the only country with a reasonably well-developed information and communications infrastructure that has not been subject to the TRIPS agreement requirements. This has led to interesting developments in the field of content distribution in Russia, not only in illegal downloading, a topic which we discuss with much too much aggression too frequently in our House, but also distribution schemes that are, or were at the time of their emergence, legal under the Russian system. At the same time, the Russian authorities appear to have no customary regard for freedom of communication or freedom of information flows. At least once during my time of political involvement, Russian authorities have casually shut legal online distribution services down at the request of foreign entities to accommodate for the advancement of World Trade Organization discussions. It would be a shame if the TRIPS implementation chosen by Russia turns out to hinder rather than foster the previously mentioned spirit of solutions for online distribution for the future. And there is good reason for the European Union to keep a close watch on the implementation of the TRIPS obligations in Russia. They establish a basis for economic interaction which depends completely on an administrative right, a monopoly granted by the government and its legal institutions onto private parties. Are we confident that the Russian administration is consistent enough to provide such a basis? In the field of copyright in particular, the TRIPS agreement and the present interpretation adopted by the dispute settlement body of the Berne three-step test should cause us to feel concern for how a future implementation of Russian copyright will relate to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Already at the European level, we are suffering from inconsistencies with the application of notice and takedown.
Please speak slowly.
Already at the European level, we are suffering from inconsistencies with the application of notice and takedown orders. One of the concerns raised in the European Union by many stakeholders is that notice and takedown requests risk imposing arbitrary restrictions on freedom of speech and freedom of expression in the Member States. Similar objections have been raised in Spain and France in the implementations of laws that grant rights holders the power to request the takedown of web pages through administrative requests rather than judicial process. The TRIPS agreement does not establish any boundaries for enforcement. In theory, it can be extended as far and as arbitrarily as a signatory party wants it to be extended. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves whether or not the situation in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of expression will be affected by the TRIPS implementation in Russia. Given our experiences in Europe, we need to keep a close eye on this. We shall also have the opportunity to revisit the question of monitoring of communications. The situation in many European jurisdictions, with the Data Retention Directive and in terms of intermediary liability for intellectual property rights infringements, is uncertain. Also in Russia, there are extensive obligations on telecommunications providers and service providers to monitor the communications of their users. We have every reason to be vigilant so that the situation in Russia does not deteriorate with respect to monitoring of communications. In terms of access control and allegedly illegal content online, the issues of blocking access to specific content has already been debated many times and by many people in the European Union member states and in the Parliament here. But these proposals exist also in Russia, again with a higher risk of arbitrary application and again with a broader scope than we would normally find in Europe. If the European Union wishes for the realisation of human rights, freedom of speech, free journalism and a free press in Russia, it will be important for us to establish first for ourselves open norms for free communication. Thank you.
Thank you. For the ECR group, Mr. Migalski for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, Madam Oomen-Ruijten was right to say that in the ranking by the World Bank, Russia is ranked at number 120 with respect to its business environment, and we hope that its